Welcome to our first classic review.
Yeah, there's an accomplishment with
Welcome to the HolmFront. I love how we're always talking.
that. I like it.
It's like-
Makes it seem like it's
It's us.
alive, like
Yeah.
we're living things.
Yeah, we do things off camera sometimes.
sometimes.
They're not always worth talking about, so you just get the parts that are worth talking about on camera.
Yeah, everything we say here should be taken as incredibly valuable.
Yeah, 'cause
That's
it's
how you
the
should
only
feel.
thing that we contribute to society at all. So, so I'm Tyler, your host, and as always, my overly artistic friend is sitting here
Hello.
with not much to contribute this time. It's so
I'm the one who told you to watch this movie.
you did, yeah, and I had not seen it. I had, oddly enough, to give some context here.
Okay.
This is weird, but I had never heard of this movie until I was taking an acting class. I know, took an acting class, just one. But I took an acting class.
Did you like it?
No, it sucked. The teacher handed out the script for 12 Angry Men, and he was trying to explain what's the word I'm looking for? I can't remember the word I'm looking for. Whatever.
Improv? Or
So it was kind of an improv, but we're supposed to read off the script. So like we're taking a character from 12 Angry Men. I think he just chose it because it was a list of characters, so he had enough people that could diversify.
okay.
Acceleration, that's the word.
Hmm.
So essentially he was like, hey, so you're supposed to match the energy in the room, and you have to have an explanation as to why, if you bring a bunch of drama or a bunch of anger, like something has to inspire that anger. And so I wasn't getting it because I was reading it as a writer, and I was reading some of the, I forget the line that I was reading, but someone pitched it to me, and then I read the line as I thought it was written. And he's like,
I
you escalated that way too hard, like way too far past what the energy in the room already was. And so he was trying to coach me into like how to deal with this appropriately.
I see.
But that was the first time, and I was like, the argument was compelling in the script, even though I was just reading a basic portion, like a real small portion of it.
Mm-hmm.
And then you mentioned it, and apparently this is a really well regarded film that I knew nothing about. But we watched Juror Number 2. See our review for Juror Number 2. And you were like, this seems a lot like 12 Angry Men.
Yeah.
And at first we tossed around the idea of putting it in the same video and kind of doing a comparison thing, but I was like, Juror Number 2 is decent enough, and we had done the recording, and I was like, I think it did well enough to stand
that
on
was
its
most
own.
of the reason. You just wanted to do
I was
more
too
work.
lazy. And then I watched 12 Angry Men later, and I was like, okay. I was like, why don't we just start a new series of like classic reviews where we go back to, stuff like this, or
Mhm.
what's the most well-regarded film of history or whatever?
Oh, Citizen Kane.
Citizen Kane. We'll do
Yeah.
something like Citizen Kane at some point, like, and kind of put them in their own context. Maybe we'll do Hitchcock and his film repertoire in that kind of vein, but
All the 100 films you should see before you die
Yeah.
kind of stuff.
which
Yeah.
at some point we'll probably create our own list that has to do with that. But today we're doing 12 Angry Men, so
that would be spicy.
it would be, wouldn't it?
That would be
People would hate
spicy.
our list, probably.
I would have some good stuff on my list, though.
I feel like we'd exclude everything that people would want, and they'd be like, how come this didn't make it?
Well, I'll tell you what, this would probably be on it, I would think, just for the script alone. It's so good.
I agree. Yeah, it did a great job with what it was. So, in that, why don't we jump in?
All right, so yeah, I'll just tell you the premise and whether or not you should see it. So the premise of this movie, despite being old, is that you're following a jury. There's 12 jurors, and they have a murder trial, and the entire film almost exclusively takes place in just that one room, and it's just their conversation of whether or not he was guilty. And there's just so much that comes through. Like, the characters are seemingly all kind of the same, and then as the story goes on, small details get revealed about each one, which then reinforces why they have the perspective that they have, or maybe to help provide a clue as to what may be potentially suspect. But the key that makes it interesting to, I think, kickstart it all is that it's hot. It's the middle of the summer. They're in New York, I think it is, right? Um,
Can't remember the city,
I'm
but
pretty sure that it is New York, and it's super hot in New York in the
they
summer, as I
may,
understand
yeah,
it.
and they don't have AC or something. There's a fan in the room that's not working initially, or it's not on, I think is what it is. And
Oh yeah,
nobody
because
thinks
they
to
need
like,
the light switch
right,
because
to
it's
turn it on.
connected. Yeah,
So they do a lot of these environmental things to kind of help you empathize with the situation and make it really just kind of
no one wants to be
it's a
there.
civic duty that no one likes. You got to
Yeah.
sit through a whole trial and hope it ends in a timely fashion so you go back to work and your daily life. Um, and then they all come in this room and everyone's just like, all right, well, he's obviously guilty, so let's just get this over with and move on, right? And so
Hmm.
it make you like draw you in because like you as an American citizen are probably familiar enough with this process in order to empathize with these characters and be like, yeah, well, open and close shut and let's just go. Let's just get this over with and leave so we can go do our things that we've been looking forward to.
Especially because they all go into that room feeling like, well, that's
It's
case
pretty
closed.
clear.
It's obvious he committed the murder. He's guilty. I guess we're done. Like, what is there to
And
discuss?
the interesting thing about what this movie does is that it has no interest in showing you any of the trial. You don't see any of it.
Yeah.
The one thing you get to see is that it's a kid. He's really young. They mentioned that he's 18 in the film, but even when they show him at first, you're like, oh, okay, this is a really, really young kid.
Yeah.
And he's sitting there. He looks terrified. The judge dismisses the jury, and they're like, all right, you're gonna go deliberate now and let us know what your decision is. You don't really know anything else except when they come in and they're like, he's guilty. Oh, he does establish that it is the death penalty as the verdict.
Right.
He's like, if you
And they
guys
have to
determine he's
be,
guilty,
and it has to be unanimous vote.
right?
So they all
Either
have to
way,
agree one way or the
right?
other. And if it's guilty, it's the chair.
It's the chair.
Yeah.
And so it's a really interesting premise to set up before they go in, knowing that a guilty verdict will lead this child to death and how flippantly everybody takes it. But they also make you empathize with that. Because, like, you're in this hot room with 12 people that might not all agree with you, but it also seems like he's really guilty based on what they got from the trial. And so you're like, well, why would you spend more time on this? So they end up doing a ballot, a vote. Like, all right, well, let's just see where everybody stands. So there's a guy who's had some experience, and he stands up, and he's like the foreman, or I forget what his title is, but
Yeah. Jury number one, I think.
yeah, he's the
Yeah.
lead juror who's supposed to be the one communicating with the judge and kind of leading the proceedings. He says, well, let's do a vote. He's like, I'm not going to try and sway anybody. I'm not going to try and put my opinion out there. I just want to see where everybody stands, and then we can talk if we need to, or we can just get this over with. So everybody starts voting. He's like, all right, who thinks guilty? And they all raise their hand except for one. And now everybody is extra mad because there's 11 people that agree and one that doesn't.
One guy holding them all up.
And that's where the moral quandary starts. And I
Yeah.
thought that this is not only is a very fascinating portion of the movie, but also it's interesting to see how one person, despite all the external factors against him, is willing to be like, you know what, we need to give this a little bit more time and effort.
Yeah.
And that's his argument. He comes out and he says, you know what? Despite whether we think he's guilty unanimously, he's an 18-year-old kid. I think he deserves at least a couple hours of our time before we just send him to death.
Yeah.
And that's what starts a conversation.
Yeah. Because it's interesting how he doesn't just.
He doesn't give his opinion.
Yeah, he doesn't say like, "Oh, well, I think he's not guilty," and they're like, "Well, then he's guilty," and he's like, "Well, I'm not sure about that either." He's like, "I just feel like the way it was conducted didn't feel like things were really fair."
Sure.
And he's
Wasn't
like,
thorough or something was the, yeah.
yeah, he's like, there's some of the things he's like, I thought the defense should have interrogated. He's like, I would have asked more like this question or that question. It would be
Sure.
like, wait a minute, that doesn't seem right. And he's like, and the defense just seemed disinterested to do that. So I don't
Right.
know that was really, fair. And then he was like, just looking at other factors, like he's like, if we're, sending this kid to death, he's like, I mean, the least we owe him is like, an hour of time to just talk about it, just to make sure nothing has been, missing from that. And, the response of the room is like, well, we don't owe him anything.
Yeah.
And, it's like, actually, funny insert. One time I was getting called in for jury duty. I didn't make it on, but I kind of wanted to be because the judge was hilarious. He was like, you should try to get on. It's going to be really exciting. We've got like a car chase.
He's listing the options of things you could be involved with.
Yeah. It's like,
So you get to pick your adventure?
yeah, he's like, it's going to be really exciting. He's like, it's like one of the
You're going to love it.
And then we were sitting there and they're calling jurors and stuff. he was like talking to like us. He's like, "So did you guys watch the Oscars?" He's like, "It's pretty interesting." He's like, "I really thought 1970 deserved to win, but I don't know. What
This
do
is
I
talking
know?"
about cultural events.
Yeah. And then like there was this thing where like because the defense and the what is it, the
Prosecutor.
prosecution, yeah, they have to like agree on which jurors or
Yeah.
whatever, and like there was like some back and forth and they didn't agree on somebody, and so he was kicked out. And then to like smooth it over, he's like, "Don't feel bad if you don't get picked on the jury." He's like, "Cause," and he kind of like stopped for a moment and then he goes, "Well, no one really knows how attorneys think. They're kind of strange people." Like right in front of him.
I like this guy.
Yeah, he was so, but I mean, he really helped like change the energy in the room because I mean, he's the judge, and so, but he was also just like, well, this is my role.
Mhm.
Everybody has their role to play, and we have to do this justice thing, but that doesn't mean we have to be miserable.
Yeah. We're all
So,
still human being. Yeah, why not
right,
interact like we are?
right, exactly. So yeah, he had some levity, but that actually kind of I got distracted with my own point. But the other one, and this is a brief one, I promise, is that when I was being commissioned, I was telling my brother-in-law, I was like, I got jury duty, and he was like, that sucks, and I was like, yeah, I was like, I don't know, it might be all right, it might be worthwhile, and he's like, the only reason you're going there is because some idiot did something wrong or something like that. It's like this idiot brought everybody to funnel into this building.
Yep.
I was like,
Which
he's
is
got it right.
which is kind of the point that these guys are making is like, well, this kid got himself into hot water.
Yeah.
He's the one that seemingly killed his father or whatever.
Right.
So it's his fault that we're all here and wasting our time
Mm-hmm.
in their perception. And they try and double down on that by one guy being like, well, I got ball tickets. I gotta get out of here to get to the game.
Yeah.
People are like throwing in real examples of stuff that they're trying to get to. And so it's like, well, get this over with. We all know he's guilty, so move on.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, the Fonda's character makes an excellent point of like, this is still a life that, we've been handed the responsibility to determining what happens with it. And I
Yeah.
think for that reason alone, we can sit here and give a couple hours at least in order to just talk. That was his reason. It was just, let's just talk.
Yeah.
Because the standard within these, and that was something we talked about with juror number 2 as well, is that it's not for them to prove it, and
Right.
that's one of the standards they had to walk the line of like, yeah, we don't have the evidence, we can't go to the scene and like determine how all this connects, but there are things we can evaluate based on what was handed to them in court. All that we have to decide is whether there's reasonable doubt or not.
Right.
Like,
Right.
can you say without a reasonable doubt that this kid is guilty? And through the discussion, they have to determine that. And that's what the subsequent discussion ends up bringing up is all the facts that came through the case. And that's why they didn't include the court portion of it. It's not a courtroom drama. It's actually what
Yeah.
happens behind the scenes afterwards. But they go over all the details of the case and all the witnesses without you having seen any of this stuff. And
Mm-hmm.
they bring out all the details. And it's interesting because you just get their perspective rather than you having experienced the case itself.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so
That part too, though, the idea of, oh shoot, I'm losing my train of thought. Gosh darn it, because you
you're
were
good.
saying the
So they're supposed to a reasonable doubt was one of them, but you get to experience the court case from their perspective rather than having experienced the case itself.
I'll come back.
You're doing great.
Thanks.
Good morning.
On live
I'll get you an
TV.
energy drink. Live TV. Okay, so within all that, you've now established a bunch of the details. Now they start introducing characters and adding nuances as to opinions. And all of them are fairly interesting. So you get a couple that are just kind of background characters because there's only so many out of 12 that you're going to be able to devote time to in this film.
Yeah.
But the ones you get are pretty interesting. So Fonda's character obviously comes to the forefront, and he's the one that presents like you don't learn anything about him. You just know that he's the dissenter,
Mm-hmm.
or as much of a dissenter as you can call him. But then there's a character to his left as he's sitting that's the oldest guy in the room that hears what he has to say, and he's like, you know what? That's right. I think, despite whether I think he's guilty or not, I think that he's got a point. Maybe we should at least just talk about it. Because
Mm-hmm.
then I think there's 3 characters in the room that are all just very upset that anything was put out that was going to keep them in that room any longer than they wanted to be.
Yeah, they're like downright hostile forces. And
Right.
when, they decide to do, after they talk a little bit, Henry Fonda's character says like, "All right, well, I've presented some things that I think need to be interrogated. So if anybody agrees with me, they can vote again. I'll abstain, but you guys have to do it secret ballot. And if there's anyone who agrees with me that that it needs to be that it's not guilty or that it needs to be discussed more, then we'll keep talking." And that's when that old man decides to do it. But when that happens, those three people who are like really hostile in the room, they jump on one guy
Hmm.
because they figure he's just like giving a a platitude, or he's like a
He just wants to be a contrarian to a certain
yeah,
extent.
something like that. And
So,
so but it's interesting because it reveals the way in which they come to their conclusions,
yeah,
which is baseless, right? They just
prejudiced at worst. Yeah.
prejudice at worst and baseless at best, because they just attack somebody almost at random in the room,
Hmm.
and you're like, "Well," and he's like, "I voted guilty again." But it's like there's a lot of that throughout this whole movie where a character will say something that then reveals something in the other person.
Mm,
It's like they almost, or they reveal themselves. They say something,
right.
like at one point one of the characters is like gets so mad and he's like, "I'm gonna kill you," and he's like, "You really gonna kill me? Or are you just saying you're gonna kill me?"
Yeah.
And it's like, because they had interrogated before, he's like, "Well, he said it. He said I'm gonna kill you." And they're like, "Yeah, but how many times do you say that and actually mean it?
Yeah.
Like that doesn't happen very often."
Yeah,
So
because
yeah,
that's the point, right? You have to determine where words now become action, and that's a
right,
lot of the discussion they have too. Because one of the guys he brings up, he's like, "Well, this kid grew up in the slums. He was probably beaten and talked down to by his father daily." He's like, "Yeah, he may have snapped." But he's like, "But this kid goes through it all the time. What was different about this day that made him snap and
right,
stab his father?" And they're like, "Well, it was an unusual knife that the kid owned." And then the thing that kind of cruxes the argument is that is it Fonda's character that pulls it out?
yeah,
He pulls out the same knife
yeah,
and he puts it on the table and he's like, "I went for a walk in that neighborhood where that kid lived and went to a thrift store
or
out
pawn
there."
shop or whatever. Yeah,
And he's like, "I found the same knife. What are the odds of that?" He's
yeah,
like, "Yeah, maybe it's a 1 in a million thing." But he's like, "But I did it.
right,
And it's the same knife."
right,
So like that alone should inspire some doubt, correct? And that's when the room kind of shifts. There's now a bunch of people that are like, "Oh, well, that's interesting." Like that
hmm,
wasn't presented in court. And again, they're
yeah,
not supposed to be proving this kid's innocence. They're just supposed to determine whether they are beyond a reasonable doubt as to whether he's guilty.
yeah.
So then they bring in, or they,
Oh, which, by the way, this is the point I was going to bring up before, is that 1950 all the way up to 70 years later, that was something that the judge was also repeatedly saying, was that like, well, he kept
you're
telling the
talking about the
jurors
judge that you were
that
talking to,
I
yeah,
experienced. Yeah, he kept telling all the potential jurors, and like as they were being like questioned by the attorneys, if the attorneys missed anything, he would jump in and be like, "Can you put aside, your personal feelings or personal interactions with any kind of people?" It's like new circumstances, new people, everything is new and fresh. Do a clean slate. He kept asking for everyone to do that clean slate mentality,
mm,
which makes sense because he's like, it's not gonna help if you're just like, "Well, I feel this or that way about
right,
it." And the kind of beyond reasonable doubt, he stressed that point too. He was like, remember, he's like, "You don't give the verdict. You don't, or you don't give the, what is it, the sentencing. I do that. That's my job. Your job is to just tell me what you agreed. If the prosecution proved beyond reasonable doubt, as
yeah,
long, if they proved, did they prove beyond reasonable doubt or not? That's your only question to answer,
sure,
which is a way to kind of alleviate that burden from just asking a citizen to carry out a death penalty. You know what I mean?
sure.
Because that's like a pretty root and reasonable thing to do. But
Well,
it
and
is
it's supposed
interesting.
to remove that because you don't
Yeah.
want to be, because if you're the one just basing this verdict off of your prejudice, and then you get to go and administer the sentence, if you get to go flip the switch on that chair, you're no better than the kid at that point. So it's
Right.
supposed to be levels of removal in order to
Yeah.
be justice rather than vengeance.
Right.
And that's the
Right.
whole point. And this movie did a really great job of showing how that works
Mm-hmm.
just in the discussions, because that's what they do over the course of the film is to start peeling back the layers of prejudice or of just, what people's perceptions were. It's like, I don't care about your perceptions. The point of this conversation is the fact that, like, can you tell me that happened? Did that kid kill his father?
Right.
And if
Right.
you can't definitively say yes, which is a difficult thing to do, period,
Right.
despite evidence and proof, and unless you have something like on camera that happened, and you can't prove that that video wasn't edited or something, it's a very hard thing to say that, especially when you have that consequence. Because like regardless of whether he's guilty or not, the weight of the burden of knowing that you sent someone to their death, especially a
Yeah.
kid like that, got to be pretty heavy, right?
I would think so, but so many of these jurors are just like, ah, he's guilty.
He's
Like,
guilty. I got a game to get to. What do
yeah,
you want?
I gotta get to the game. And then like, well, I don't know if I have really a reason, but I just think he's guilty.
Yeah, that was kind of our
Like,
the
sure.
he was like the intro to the like all the background characters. The voice of Piglet, I forget his name, but he's in there, and they ask reasons. They go around the room, and they're supposed to give why they think he's guilty after they do
Mm.
the vote. And they ask him, and he goes, "Well, I don't really know. He just feels guilty to me." And that was all he gave, and I was like, as sad as that is, that's probably, and that's one of the reasons why this movie aged so well. Is like that's just a human thing.
Yeah.
You'd
Yeah.
have humans today that would probably, maybe even more so,
Yeah.
be like, "Well, he feels like it. It feels guilty to me." Well,
Yeah.
okay, that's not the standard. So I don't really care how you feel about it. Like again, you're supposed to go out there and hand a verdict based on this one thing, and he didn't do anything to prove that.
Right. Right.
So they continue down the room, and more people seem to like start to give credence the more they think about it.
Well, there's even the ones like there's the guy who's like some business shill, and he's got like these big glasses, and he always presents these suggestions. He's like, well, I don't know, I have an idea. I haven't really given it much thought, but I'll just throw it out there. And every time he does that, it's always like the worst suggestion.
Yeah.
You're just like, wait a minute,
It's
what?
just
Like I
Start
think,
at the bottom, and maybe it'll work its way up. Like
yeah, yeah.
other suggestions will build this.
Yeah, I think he's the one who says like, "Well, it seems like it's on us to try to convince you to think the way that we do." It's like, wait a minute, why is that
Right.
just because like if we had 20 different people or 12 different people, who's to say that there wouldn't be one person in the room who thinks they're guilty and everybody else thinks he's
Sure.
innocent? Like we don't know that. Like so he's just like, oh well, seems obvious. So you're the one who's like detracting.
Well, then there's the other guy who's just, he doesn't care either way. And he's just like, "Yeah, well, I mean, seems like he's guilty to me, I guess." But then when the room starts to shift to not guilty,
Yeah.
he's like, "Well, yeah, okay, well, then let's just say not guilty and get this over with." And there's an interesting character
Yeah.
who he claimed, I forget where he's from, but he's an immigrant from somewhere into America.
Yeah.
And he seems like he's a lot more thoughtful than a lot of the other characters in the room.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things he gets on that character at first, he's like, have some conviction. The
Yeah.
point of this country, or the point of this process, is to show that justice exists here. And like this process is to remove you in order to give people the best chance that they can have. Right?
Mhm.
Because depending on whether he's guilty or not, sometimes it's not easy to tell. And so to give this kid a chance, like you're supposed to be, you're innocent until proven guilty.
Right.
He's like, those standards and morals are something worth fighting for, worth giving time to. He's like, so have a stance. Whatever your stance might be, like have one, have some
Mhm.
principles. And so when the guy shifts over and he's like, well, let's just say not guilty since everybody else is saying it, he's like, he gets just as mad. He goes,
Right.
no, it's the same argument. I
Right.
don't care what you think.
Yeah.
I care that you think it. He's
Right,
like,
right.
have a principle, have a stance,
Right.
and back it up.
And
have
he's
a
like, I don't have to
backbone.
explain myself to you. And he's
Right.
like, yeah, you do.
Yeah, that's the whole point. We're here.
Yeah.
Like, say what it is you think, but at least say that you think it. Like, think something.
Yeah.
Have a principle and have the backbone to back it up.
right.
And if you don't have one, that's okay. But don't just sway with the wind.
right.
Like,
right.
this is our responsibility, whether you like it or not. We're all here because of that. And, we don't want you to just sway based on the room.
Right.
Because then it's the same thing as if we sent him to the chair. Like, you're not giving this kid a fair shake. You're just saying something that's going to get you out of the room faster.
Right. Because what if he is guilty and he did do it, and now you're just
Releasing a criminal back on the streets.
right? If you have a point about him not being guilty, okay, great. But like if you have like you said, just that conviction, have a reason,
Right.
and then present that reason and have it interrogated. One of the characters who gets interrogated, it's one of my favorite ones. It's the guy. It's another guy with glasses, but he has
By
like the
the
kind
way,
of
this isn't just us forgetting a bunch of names. They don't name anybody.
yeah.
It's just the
Sorry.
jurors. It's the jurors' numbers, and I don't remember all the numbers that who they're ascribed to. But there's three like main dissenters. There's
Yeah.
two that are really aggressive. There's one who's just like ready to fight everybody that disagrees with him. And then there's this guy. He seems like he's equally as stubborn, but a lot more reserved. And
hmm
he doesn't sweat. That was one of the things that comes up in the room. I don't know if he's like some tycoon or something, but he wears a pair of glasses and he doesn't sweat. Like
Yeah.
everyone else is sweating their butt off.
Right.
And even one guy goes, "Do you ever sweat?" And he goes, "No." And the
Yeah.
one part that he does sweat is when an argument's presented to him that makes him consider his position. But anyway, so
Yeah.
the guy with the glasses.
Well, yeah, like his character is super interesting because he's not like in league with the other two like main
Right.
guilty verdict voting people because those two guys, they it's like you see in some cases very quickly how there's definitely like a prejudice against this kid
Mm.
from their own experiences somehow, and that's bleeding into it. But with this third guy, that's not the case because he doesn't care to jump on the bandwagon with them when they try to rile him up. He was saying, he's like, oh, he's like, that guy got a rise out of me. And he's like, yeah, he did a really good job of it. So he's
Right.
willing to just
It's
throw
just
him under the
totally
bus.
insulting him.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're an
because,
idiot.
yeah, he's like, he's like, I have my own reasons for voting guilty. They're not yours. Yours seem, I don't have to care about
Right.
what your reasons are. I just have mine. And the thing that makes him just so fascinating is it's not until they present an argument and it's like but it's like it's nice good interaction because they're having to deal with some people in the room like you said they're being flippant or they're prejudiced and that's not helpful to the discussion. But this guy, he's like, she said she saw him.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how to
Yeah, there's an
deal with
eyewitness
this. The eyewitness, yeah.
that sees from her window into the kid running or something, I think it was.
hmm
She doesn't see the actual act of the kid stabbing him, but she sees the kid in a scenario that would kind of indict him. And that's the
Yeah.
other thing about this movie. It doesn't care to prove to you whether the kid is guilty or not. So you don't know actually what happens. But
Right.
again, that's not important. What's
Right.
important is this
The
group
process.
this group of men that are discussing how to get to a specific objective, and
hmm
that's reasonable doubt.
Yeah.
So there's a character who claims to have seen something, and it's an eyewitness account that this man is holding on to because there's two eyewitnesses. There's one old guy and then a lady that they talk about.
hmm
The lady not only sees it from across the room because she can't sleep or whatever, she's in bed, but she wears glasses, and that was one of the things. So one of the old guys brings up, he
Yeah.
was like, yeah, I saw a lady that tries her best to look a lot younger than she does, or that she is, and she wears glasses, and she wasn't wearing them in the courtroom in order to look more
Look
appealing.
nice. Yeah.
But we know that she wears glasses because she has the two divots on her nose
Yeah.
that all the other
the
characters in
marks.
this room have, including that guy that was relying on her testimony. Like, that
Right.
was his crux.
Right.
But they were like, don't you have those marks on your nose? He
Mhm.
goes, yeah. And they're like, well, but does anything else create those divots except for glasses? He goes, no. They're like, well, if she wears glasses and she's looking that far away, do you sleep with your glasses on? And he's like, no, of course not. They're
Right.
like, well, so you're saying that she turns over in bed, looks over and sees something, puts on her glasses, and in this short, because
Yeah.
the amount of time that she would have had to spend doing that is far more than the amount of time it would have taken for her to see whatever event it was that she claimed to have seen. And so for them, it was like, well, that alone inspires some doubt.
Right.
Because like these cases can be really sensational, and that was the point that the old guy made about the other old guy. Is like
Yeah.
this guy seems like he's a nobody. He probably hasn't had a lot of recognition. He probably has a family that doesn't see him if they do at all,
Mhm.
and he gets this moment to sit in front of all these people and be important.
Right.
And he's like reading this out of this, and he's like, yeah, maybe he saw something, but also there's other factors in here that would make me question his viability. I don't know him personally, but I can see these factors that I can attribute to him. Same thing with this woman.
Yeah.
And so they laid that aspect out, and this is something that this guy can latch onto, because he didn't buy the thing with the old man. He's like, well, I don't really care about the old man because this lady also saw something. But
Right.
this
This is the piece
lady,
of evidence that for me is enough to go in this
right?
particular direction. Right.
But this lady has a condition with which I empathize. I have this
Yes.
experience. And I know, based on what these guys are laying out to me, that, yeah, that is true.
Right.
If I were in that scenario, that would be very difficult for me to have done and seen as she explains it. And
Yeah.
now he gets that reasonable doubt. And what's fascinating about that scene, he argues for a while, but then he goes silent when Fonda brings up that point, because then you can see the gears start turning in his head.
Yeah.
And you can tell that, like, his integrity kicks in. He's like, I don't need to argue this anymore, because what he's just introduced to me is the reasonable doubt that we've been talking about this whole movie.
Right.
And now I cannot say without a shadow of doubt that this kid's guilty.
And also, this movie only has like 5 minutes left, so I got to wrap it up. No.
Yeah, exactly. He's like, he's going to say cut in a second here. We got to go.
No, but you're right. Like that's like one of my favorite scenes in this whole film is because, and like I love how the character next to him, who's just been like, "Come on, like you're gonna let that." He's like, "Oh, come on, like it's possible she was wearing her reading glasses to bed," and then he just turns
It's
at him
possible.
and he just turns at him and goes, "No one reads." He's like, "No, it isn't. Like no one
Right.
wears a reading
I
glasses."
go to bed like that every night.
Right.
Yeah.
I never do that. She never does that. There's no way that's possible. And so he just shuts it down. He's like, what they've presented is accurate and true.
Right.
I'm someone who wears reading glasses. I would know. So he's like, no, it doesn't make sense. So how he's just following the logic. And like you said, there's that interesting idea about having your own way to like sympathize or your own way to like relate to the situation. Because when you brought up the old man in the room and how he's starting to question the credibility of the old man that was brought on trial, he was like, it's because he himself is old. And it makes sense that he has experienced rejection. He has experienced, being forgotten about. Those are things that happen in time. And so he's looking at this old guy going like, okay, some of this stuff seems familiar to me. But he doesn't bring it up because at the time it's like, well, it just seems like the rest of the case is solid. Everyone else is feeling that way. But then when the opportunity arises, which is exactly what Henry Fonda's character and why it's so important what he does, he's not arguing that he's not guilty or that he has a belief in that. He's saying it should be discussed because we might have missed something, and you have missed something,
Right. And then the film obviously shows that. But it also, because there's 12 people in this room, and the way that they develop all this is that everyone's perspective is important. And
Right.
and they give the
Right.
reasons as to why.
Mm-hmm.
And that was what was so interesting about it, because Henry Fonda was right. It wasn't about the kid not being guilty or being guilty. It was about the fact that this is worth a conversation at least. And the movie then proves that that's true. It's like,
Right.
yeah, just because you had the talk, now you've determined that maybe it's not as cut and dry as you thought it was.
Right.
There's a lot of stuff here that doesn't quite add up to this conclusion.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm not going to be held responsible for killing a kid based on the fact that I can't say he's guilty
Right.
without a doubt. So all
Yeah.
that being said, well, go ahead.
Well, I had one more
Go ahead.
point to throw into that because, like, another prime example is when they talk about how the stabbing happened and it was like down and in,
Oh,
or
that's
something
right.
like that.
Right.
And a couple of them kind of take it and kind of pretend, and they're like, "Yeah, I guess that makes sense to me." And then one guy goes to do it, and he's like, "Whoa, wait a minute. That's not how you do that." He's like, "If you live on the street and you have a switchblade, you don't stab somebody like that. You would never do that. It doesn't make any sense." He's like, "You would pop it out and then jab." And everyone's like, "Well, how do you know that?" And he's like, "Well, I grew up on the street." Like,
And they established that earlier too, because one of the guys makes a comment of like, "Well, he's just a a thug kid. He just lives in the slums.
oh yeah,
They all turn out this way, so like they're not worth anything." And he pipes up and he's like, "Well, that's where I grew up."
right,
He's like, I got here, so what am I worth? Am I just worth that? If you
right,
grow up in the slums, you're just worth nothing your whole life? He's like, I'm a respectable member of society now. I'm on this jury. Like, I get
right,
to help determine here, too. So they
right.
establish that character's background, and then, yeah, he goes up and he's like, it would take too much to switch the blade out and then flip it around and then stab him from above.
Especially someone bigger than him.
Right, because it's established that the father's like 6 or 7 inches taller than the kid, and he's like,
Mhm.
why would you flip the whole thing around and then come in from above this thing is supposed to just switch out and just go in. Like that's how you use this blade.
Right.
And again, it's not about how the blade was actually used.
Right.
The point is that he has a perspective now that introduces that doubt. It's like, well, you
Right.
cannot prove that that's what he did, but you do know that he was a stab from a downward angle,
Right.
and it would be unusual for this blade to be used that way.
Right.
And so
Right.
it's just a weird argument to have been made, especially from a shorter kid.
Right.
And so all that to say,
So it's yeah, but
his perspective is valuable because of his experience.
exactly. Yeah, it's like, you know, the prosecution brings it up, nobody challenges it. And this is like one of those great things that I love about this film is where it feels like there's a larger picture you can envision happening that it depicts outside of that room. Where, like, if someone doesn't do their job correctly, it then becomes the burden of the next person, and then the next person, and then the next person. And the jury is the final straw. That's
Right.
the last room. So it's like if the defendant had interrogated that and been like, that's a weird way to use the switchblade. But maybe the defendant doesn't know because he's not familiar
Sure.
with, switchblades and how they operate or whatever. But you see what I'm saying? Where it's like, if he doesn't know, then he can't bring it up. And then it slips through.
Yep.
And then it becomes a responsibility of the jury. If the police officers didn't interrogate it closely enough, then it passes on to the attorneys and on and on. So it's like there's this trail that happens. And so it makes like Henry Fonda's point is really crucial how he starts it off because he's like, well, we can't just like dismiss this stuff because what everyone else is doing is like, well, we can just trust the prosecution. We can
Sure.
just trust the police report. We can just trust the eyewitness accounts. We just trust all of those factors and then we don't have to do anything. And really, what they're doing is enabling human fallibility to take precedence
Yep.
and just shrugging off that responsibility. So instead, Fonda's like, well, I don't know. Some of it seems a little bit sus to me, so I think it should be investigated. But more than that, it's like, he's like, we're just going to send this kid to the chair without even talking about
Right.
it. It just feels a little cold. We're asked to like evaluate the case, and so I would like it to be evaluated.
Yep.
And that's all that I want. I just want people to like voice their opinions, what they think, the reasoning, how did they get to that conclusion. Some of it seems suspect to me. And then, in so doing, he's able to be that final pivot that can then shift that narrative. And maybe maybe he did do it, and maybe they give the wrong verdict. But it's also like there's so much doubt that they reveal. Like everyone in the room is at the end just like, I don't know. There's clearly other things happening here
Sure.
that weren't done well. So we have to give the verdict that makes sense to us.
Right. So all that being said, we call Glasses Guy the mini boss. So we've crested that hill. That one, he had a bit of reason that they could work with.
Okay, so final boss.
So now we have the final boss. Now the final boss, we're just throwing all this terminology in for.
I know.
So the final boss has two sides. There's the one who's the second oldest guy in the room,
Yes.
and there's an interesting moment in there where he just shows that it doesn't matter what's shown to him. He's just gonna hold firm. He is too set in his ways. He doesn't care.
Guilty.
He's just gonna hold it until the end. And there's
And it's because he's prejudiced. He just
he's
hates
just
this
and he's
kid.
shown that he's prejudiced is the other thing.
Right.
So now everybody's aware that he just hates this kid.
Right.
And so there's a moment in there where after the glasses guy is convinced, this guy jumps up and he's just so mad. He's like, "No, don't you all understand? He's guilty. He's guilty,
You're
guilty,
letting him get away with it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And everyone in the room subsequently turns away from him.
Yep.
And is like, you're not even worth listening to at this point because there's no reason.
Right.
You have no emotional connection with this kid. You have no reason to hate him so much,
Right.
but you just do.
Right.
And you're just inserting that. You have nothing there that is of value,
Right.
and you're just worth ignoring. And he's ignored into silence,
Right.
which is the great part of that. It's just everyone's like, well, it's not even worth listening to. You didn't provide any interesting argument. You didn't provide any nuance. You didn't provide why you think this is true. You just provided that you think he's guilty.
Yeah. You just want to flaunt your anger.
Yeah, you're
Yeah.
Piglet in the beginning, but after hearing all this reason, still don't care. You're like, I
Right.
still want to just leave, and you guys are keeping me from this.
Actually, I think it's the guy with the glasses who actually talks him down because he's the last person to respond to him, where he says, "Sit down, shut up, and don't talk," or "Sit
Oh,
down and
that's
don't
right.
talk again," something like
Yeah.
that.
Don't
He
say
just
another word or
Yeah,
whatever.
because
Yeah.
he's not interested in what he has to say either, and I think
Mm.
that's actually before he shifts his position too, if I'm not mistaken,
Or
because
perhaps I
that's
got
the
this
reason.
out of order, but yeah.
Because he's just like, no one wants to hear what you have to say. You're not being fair to the evidence, which is what you're supposed to do.
Right.
You're just using your biases everywhere. There is no purpose for that here. There's no reason to be bringing that up. So just go sit over there.
Yeah, keep your personality outside.
Right.
You're just supposed to be a robot in here. You're just to give,
Right.
one or the other. But then you have the other side of that coin, which is a guy that is applying his personal situation to the case.
Yeah.
And he explains this early on. He's like, "Well, yeah, don't you know these kids, these kids these days, they don't listen, they don't respect you, and of course they're going to end up like this, stabbing your father." And he's like, "Of course he's guilty." But he applies it because he has a kid that is now ignoring him. He has a son of a similar age
Mm-hmm.
that he feels like he has been wronged by. He's like, "Yeah, I've worked you do all this stuff, you make all these sacrifices, you work your butt off, and then they just take advantage and they run off at the first chance they get." And you
Yeah.
can tell, like, okay, yeah, well, you're probably a huge factor in all this, but
Yeah.
I get it. He's
Seems like
pretty hurt by it, but I can see why you got to that.
yeah,
that
it seems
conclusion.
like you had a role to play in this. I might suggest
Probably. But he's applying that to the scenario, and he's one that holds out to the last.
Yep.
Because he's not quite as unreasonable as the older guy who just doesn't have a reason,
Mm-hmm.
but he is an example of applying personal prejudice to an event that has nothing to do with him.
Right.
He is not involved in this. It's not his son,
Right.
but he's seeing it that way. And he's able to take out his anger at his own son on this kid.
Right.
And I think when that reality finally sets in, he's like, "I'm about to kill someone I don't know. Or I'm about to allow an open door for a verdict that leads to this kid's death." So, we'll take away the direct action. But
Yeah, sure.
I'm about to do this to someone who is not my son. And if it were my son, would I be doing this?
Yeah.
And so he holds out, but he has an emotional break. And he throws his wallet down on the table, and this picture of his son pops out, and he looks down at it. And you can just, he does a great job of portraying this, but you can tell all that flows through his head. He's like, "I'm just so angry at my son. I'm going to take it out on this other kid, and it's going to lead to him sitting in a chair."
Right.
He's like, "But I'm probably the problem."
Yeah.
And that's what he bends down, he cries on the table, and he says, "Not guilty." He gives it up. He finally is like, the final boss has been defeated.
The drama.
I know.
It's such good
It
drama.
was so dramatic, but it was so good. I was like,
Yeah.
it was so nice because you could tell that he had come to the same conclusion as Glasses guy,
Mm-hmm.
but his was so much more personal. Glasses
Right.
guy didn't care. He was just like, that eyewitness saw it.
Right.
And to him,
How am I
that
supposed
was
to
it.
refute that?
Yeah, I
To me,
can't.
it's conclusive proof.
Right.
Like, it just
Because he
doesn't matter.
seemed as stubborn as the other two
Right.
guys. But he was so willing as soon as that doubt came in to let those gears take over. And he's like, "You're right. I
Yeah.
can't argue against that
Mm-hmm.
because I know that's true."
Right.
This
right.
guy was so personally invested.
didn't matter. You
Right.
could throw out all the other evidence, is
Right.
what he says.
He's so guilty. Yeah, exactly.
And then the piglet guy throws it back to him later where he's like, she saw him. We don't need anything else. And then they're like, what does she say? He's like, you can throw out all the other evidence. And then there's a line where it reverses where he says something akin to like, I can't remember what it was, but he says something else. He's like, "Oh, what? You proved this or that?" He's like, "It doesn't matter." And he's like, that's just one argument. And he's like, "Well, you said we could throw out all the other evidence."
Yeah, that's right. We could throw out all that argument. That's argument.
Let's just throw it all out then, I guess.
And then he goes quiet, like, "Oh, my own spells used against me, Potter."
Pretty much, yeah, because he gets all just irritable because he brings up the points, but he does it in that kind of malicious way, and he's not really interested in. He doesn't want the idea entertained that it could be a different interpretation. There could be a different outcome to that. And yeah, that breakdown is really what sells. And I like the interaction he has with Fonda's character because if Fonda's the one who put them down this spiral, and he gets his jacket.
Got all of his ire for sure.
Right. So he gets his jacket, and then he gives it to him, and they walk out together. And it's just kind of a nice moment. And I think if I remember correctly, Fonda has the white suit, and
and
then
he's
the
got
other
the
guy
black
the
one.
black. Yeah.
Yeah, which I mean, it's hard to tell over black and white, but you can tell the color differentiation. But yeah, so everybody filters out.
Mm-hmm.
Fonda puts his jacket on, and then there's only one other jacket hanging there, so he grabs it and walks it over to the guy who's still laying on the table,
Yeah.
and he just rests his hand on him.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't like prompt him to stand up or put his jacket on or anything. He just rests his hand, waits for him to stand up,
Mm-hmm.
and then helps him put it on. They don't say a word. They don't shake hands. They don't hug. They just acknowledge
Yeah.
that this is the reality, but like we don't need to talk about it.
Yeah.
It's just kind of a respectful way of saying, "Hey, I hope you work this out." Is kind of like the unspoken thing. Is like, I
Yeah.
this is your open door to go fix things with your son, but
Mm-hmm.
like you did the right thing here, and I can respect that.
And there's also this message about like I love the shot of just through the coats in the hanger, and how
Hmm.
everybody comes up and grabs their coat, because it's just this like it could have been any number of people,
Right.
and that's the whole process of it. Is this everybody is a jacket at the end of the day,
Hmm.
and so they all put it on, and then by putting it on and walking out the door, it's almost like they go back to their old lives, back to
Hmm.
being a civilian, back to being uninvolved with this stuff. But there was a service; they were asked to do something, and it's like a matter of how well did they rise to the occasion to actually do that.
Right.
um yeah, so it's just a nice symbol. I actually like how this film is shot, despite like being just in one room, something that doesn't really get brought up much, but you got to be kind of creative to make it dynamically interesting to
Yeah,
watch.
visually stimulating,
Yeah.
especially
Yeah.
an older film. It
Did you
holds up, by the way.
Yeah, you felt like it was well shot?
Oh yeah, yeah. There's specifically a one. It's called a oneer. It's a one shot that they do as everyone comes into the room and they're kind of like flowing through and hearing. You're just getting snippets of conversations as they're going.
Oh
That was
yeah.
really interesting because you got the businessman talking about like his ventures, the guy talking about his baseball cars, his
Uh-huh.
tickets, and how one guy's talking about how it's really hot or like it's just there's just snippets you get, and it's you get to follow someone around the room as if you're an attendee walking around and hearing everything that's going on before they sit down and really
Mm.
develop everything. So I really liked all that. The only ones that I thought were dated, where there's like two or three of them. The oldest guy, the one that sides with Fonda right away.
Yeah.
He's the one that kind of delivers the lines that preach they're like the crux of the matters. They're the little points that he makes. He kind
Mhm.
of embodies those. And each time he does that, the camera gets right up in his grill. And it's this weird
Yeah.
like upward angle and he's
Yeah.
like looking right at the camera, so it's
And he's
real
got these like
awkward.
strong shadows on his face,
Right.
and he's just like, I did.
Yeah, exactly. It's so weird. It was like, it's a little dated, but if you can look past that, I mean, those were the only like critiques I had in the movie. Otherwise, like everything else is really well shot. It's really engaging conversation. And I mean, aside from him like bursting into tears at the end, it doesn't have a lot of like the classic drama in the movie where like the ladies, oh, like
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
very
yeah.
it's very tame
Yeah.
comparatively for its age. 'Cause I think it's like 1953 or something like that.
Oh, is it? Okay.
It's aged for sure, but
Yeah.
the principles in it are all things that kind of transcend
Mhm.
cultural norms or whatever. Like this is a process that's still stuck around, and these are the ideals upon which this process has been created. And so the film artistically is trying to show why this is important and how.
Yeah.
And I think it does that incredibly well while still being an engaging film to watch. I mean, it is very
Mhm.
entertaining, but it also gives you a good perspective of how and why this is important and what you're dealing with some of this civic duty that we have as American citizens.
Yeah. One point actually that my sister brought up when she saw it, she really loved this movie when I showed it to her, but she said that it was interesting how the film actually does itself a favor through time, because you go back sometimes to like an old movie, and it's like, all right, there's a lot of white people, there's a lot of males
Sure.
in film, but like this movie really benefits from that, because you actually go into it with the assumption that they're all kind of more or less the same. You kind of blanket statement. And as the film goes on, you don't get to like know them on like a deep level, but you do get to find out details about them. You're like, oh, well, he's like a recent immigrant, so
Hmm.
he hasn't been here. Okay, interesting. And then, oh, wait a minute, well, he grew up in the slums. That changes things,
Yep.
And then this guy is much older. He has a different perspective, and this person, works this or that. And so because of those things, as they kind of come to life, you start to recognize how it doesn't matter, right? Because it's really not important like who is there. Like you said, you're almost supposed to be a robot on some level, or like
Right.
the function of what you're supposed to do has to have this very specific result, and it's you just doing your best to evaluate the information, assessing all of that, and then coming to your conclusion, and then interrogating that conclusion to make sure that it's thorough.
Yep.
That is the process, and you can do that regardless of who you are, what you look like, where you come from. And so the film, I think, kind of opens up that door because it sort of makes you think initially that everybody is just going to be the same and have the same perception, which is how they start. But then the reasons why certain characters shift are very different from one another. And it's this nice exploration of human nature. Like the guy who just wants to get to the ball game, and his stupid reason for changing his position. It's like he's like the worst one to me. Just for that. It's like
He's just
because
so unprincipled that it's
yeah, it's like he has nothing that he holds true. I'm just like, man, like it's seeing the game is more important to you than somebody's life,
right.
like than to just sacrifice an hour and just I don't know interrogate that. It's like, come on, man. So but like that's like a real person. There's
Right.
probably lots of people that would do that,
Sure.
and you're
Well,
almost
especially if you've convinced yourself throughout the case, because you don't know how long this case was. I mean, he might have been sitting in there for
yeah,
weeks, like listening to this, and he's just like, "Yeah, I thought he's guilty from day two, so I just had to sit there and listen to them prove that he's guilty over and over and
right.
over in my mind." So now to have that challenge, she's like,
Mm.
"No, it's just gonna be a more waste of my time, so I don't really care. Just let me out of the room."
Yeah, which is like fair enough.
Sure.
But it's
But the
also, but
apathy
yeah,
there is
yeah.
is tough to stomach from the outside looking in. But if you're in this situation, I mean, can you honestly say that you would be different? Because at a certain point, you might be like, "Okay, just set him in. I'll flip the switch at this point." Like,
Just so we can move on with our
I'll
lives.
give me the knife. I'll kill him with the same one. So yeah, I mean, apathy is a very difficult human thing to deal with, especially when you're forced to disregard it in order to
Yeah.
give someone else a fair shake.
Hmm.
But at a certain point, it's like, well, how many of these values do you have to understand transcend apathy?
Yeah.
Because, like, yeah, we as humans we're going to lean towards that because it's a lazy thing, right? It's the path
Hmm.
of least resistance in some of this. But at the same time,
Yeah.
like, is it? And
Hmm.
I think that's what the film was toying with was like, well, apathy is going to lead to some pretty heavy consequences, whether you acknowledge them or not. At some point, you're going to have some hard time sleeping knowing that this kid didn't get a chance because you didn't give it to him.
Right. Exactly.
So,
And that would then rest on your shoulders. Just a big weight.
yeah, no thanks.
Yeah. Because
Uh,
and like imagine what if it was you sitting in there and you
right.
knew that it wasn't your fault or that you had
Sure.
nothing to do with it, and now you're being accused of this horrible thing.
Sure.
You know, you would want people in the other room to
To give you a fair
really,
shake.
yeah, to just give a fair shake. Yeah, it's like the least you could give them. You made a comparison with juror number two, and we kind of got off on talking about um, or like now we've been on a kick of watching like not courtroom dramas, but like
Close
whatever,
enough.
yeah, whatever you'd
It was
call
clearly
this.
inspired. Like, juror number two had a lot of similar elements and pacing, and so you could tell it had a lot of inspiration from it. So that's why we chose this one first. But
Yeah, well, in that movie, I was just gonna say, like, when they do the jury like meets to like discuss, they have the same usual detractors. Let's just get out of here. It's obvious. Let's just go with this, and it doesn't. It's like you just get a snippet of that, and then the film is about other things, and those things are interesting too. But it was something that it's like if you want that jury interrogation, this is the movie
yeah,
to
this is the
watch.
one for
This is
sure.
the one for that
Juror number
dialogue.
two brings in some other questions as to like because the juror number two thinks that he might have been involved in it. That is the reason why he detracts or he's the detractor,
Yes.
and it's not about him. He's just saying there's enough doubt here because I know it's not true, but I don't want to admit that.
Yeah.
Whereas this one, no one's involved, so that one's like a natural progression of including an external factor and not just remaking 12 Angry Men.
Mhm.
So or 12 Angry Jurors, I guess it would be called these days, but yeah, this is the one to really explore that process. Juror number two is a lot more nuanced with a specific, instance or set of instances, I guess.
Mhm. But the other film we actually reviewed somewhat recently was September 5,
Hmm.
and that kind of had at least a moment that reminded me of 12 Angry Men as well. And it's where uh in that movie they're like on a break, but they're watching this like terrible like this hostage
Oh yeah.
situation that they're interrogating, and that some guys are kind of laughing at watching a ball game, and then the director gets mad at him. He's like, look, take that outside, just get rid of it, like we're trying to concentrate on something serious. But that kind of thing happens in this movie too. At some point some of the jurors get distracted and they start doing tic-tac-toe, and then Henry Fonda just grabs the paper, rips it up, and he's like, this isn't a game. And it's like, yeah, seriously, like
Right.
you guys are just like so willing to just like go back to your own, I just got to entertain myself, got to
Right.
find my entertainment. But I was bringing that up because, this is a movie where I think a lot of others actually owe themselves to it without really
Mm,
even realizing it. You know what I mean? Like September 5, I don't think was trying to be like 12 Angry Men, but
sure.
the parallel exists whether it wants to acknowledge it or not.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Would recommend. 2
Classic
thumbs up.
movie. If you've not seen it yet, you owe it to yourself. Even though we've said a lot, it's a movie that I've never gotten tired watching it. I've seen it
Oh,
a
I'd
number of
easily watch
times.
that again. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah,
Mhm.
it's very timeless. Like, there's barely any fat in this movie. It really
Mhm.
gets to the point and holds your attention, keeps the tension there. It doesn't feel like it wastes anything in it.
Mhm.
So, yeah, if you're looking for a classic,
Feels
this is
like
the
a
one.
great reminder movie too. One of
Mhm.
those you would throw on like every 5 years or so and just kind of like be like, yeah, because I guess because it has so much to do with like law and order coming together, right?
Sure.
Despite the humanity and the frictions that creates. So it deals with all of that, and then it ends in such a way where you're like, I'm glad I went through that conversation,
Yeah,
which is
right.
like how you feel watching the movie. I'm glad I watched that movie.
And on that, I think we'll call it. End of the point.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks for watching.